Black woman CEO mistaken for event staff at leadership conference until she shuts down their $200,000 sponsorship deal. Ma'am, you need to step away from the sponsor lounge. That area is reserved for VIP guests and speakers. The voice came from behind, sharp, condescending, and amplified through a microphone that echoed across the main ballroom of the Phoenix Leadership Summit. Hundreds of people turned toward the disruption. Business leaders, investors, media reps, some with confusion, others with that subtle smirk people wear when they think someone's about to get humiliated. Standing near a sleek glass-top tomato table stacked with branded champagne flutes and corporate gift bags was a woman in her early 50s, April Dawson. She wore a simple navy sweater, tan slacks, and black flats. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she carried a small leather tote bag that had clearly seen years of use. Nothing about her appearance screamed wealth or power, and that was the point. The event coordinator, a tall white woman in a headset named Karen Whitmore, strode up with a clipboard clutched to her chest like a badge of authority. "This table hasn't been cleaned," Karen said into her mic, pointing. "Please have it reset before guests arrive in 15. The silence that followed was heavy. April turned slowly to face her, expression unreadable. "Excuse me?" she asked, her tone neutral, calm. Karen raised an eyebrow and gestured to April's tote bag. "Catering staff aren't allowed in this section once we've dressed the tables. Please go through the back hallway, and if you're not assigned to this ballroom, I'll need your supervisor's name." The humiliation was surgical, precise, public, the kind of microaggression that cloaks itself in policy and protocol. April didn't move. She reached into her bag and calmly pulled out a black lanyard, flipping it forward to reveal a speaker badge with a bold red stripe. Platinum sponsor, April Dawson, Dawson Solutions, Inc. Karen blinked but didn't apologize. Instead, she frowned. "That must be a printing error. You're not on our speaker check-in. Maybe check with registration again?" From the far end of the ballroom, a young MC named Ben Frazier, early 30s, blue blazer, always performing, noticed the standoff and decided to intervene. Without verifying anything, he tapped the mic and said, "Folks, just a quick reminder. Only verified VIP guests and sponsors should be near the media booths. Please respect staff instructions so we can stay on schedule." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone in a Gucci dress whispered, "Awkward." A man in a designer suit chuckled. She thought she could sneak into VIP with that outfit? Phones came out. TikTok was already recording. A user tagged the moment, #SummitFail. April said nothing. She glanced around at the audience, hundreds of corporate professionals staring at her like she didn't belong. Not yet angry, just disappointed, like she'd seen it all before. She pulled her phone from her pocket, tapped a message to her assistant, then tucked it away. Karen, still convinced she was right, motioned for a security guard near the ballroom entrance. "Let's get this cleared up now before our board sponsor arrives," she muttered. The irony was suffocating. Because the board sponsor had arrived, April Dawson was the board sponsor. Her company had donated $200 million to the Phoenix Leadership Summit, making Dawson Solutions the largest single investor in the event's history. She didn't need to be on the speaker list. She owned the list, but no one had bothered to ask. No one had even checked her badge. They saw a black woman dressed simply and assumed she was there to serve, not to speak. That she worked behind the scenes, not on the main stage. That she was support, not leadership. And now, the cameras were rolling. She watched as the security guard approached, hand on his earpiece. April calmly reached into her tote again, not flinching, not raising her voice, and pulled out a business card. Metal, laser-etched, the kind that catches light when you hold it just right. She handed it to Karen without a word. Karen read it, blinked, and took a half-step back. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Ben Frazier, halfway through his next joke on stage, caught sight of Karen's face and faltered. The ballroom quieted. Every eye returned to April. Phones were up. TikTok, YouTube Shorts, live streams, hundreds of them. She was the CEO hadn't been created yet, but it would be. In the next 3 minutes, the entire dynamic of the conference and the careers of several people were about to change forever. And all April Dawson had to do was tell the truth. For a moment, no one moved. The ballroom, once filled with idle chatter, networking laughter, and the clink of coffee cups on saucers, fell into a silence so thick it almost echoed. Karen still held the metal business card in her hand, like it might burn her fingers. Her face was flushed, jaw tight, throat visibly constricting as she tried to find words that wouldn't dig the hole deeper. She didn't succeed. "Ms. Dawson, I didn't recognize you," she stammered, her voice suddenly stripped of authority. The security guard standing beside her paused, uncertain now. His eyes flicked from the badge around April's neck to the card, then to her calm, steady gaze. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" he asked April, almost respectfully. "Not anymore," she replied. "But thank you for checking." Her voice was even, not sharp, not confrontational, but everyone watching could feel the shift. It wasn't anger. It was control. April didn't storm off. She didn't lash out. She simply turned, walked toward the main stage with the same quiet authority she'd entered with, and disappeared behind the curtain where speakers were preparing for the keynote. The damage, however, had already been done, and it was spreading fast. Back near the barista station, a young woman with box braids had caught the whole thing on video and was already captioning it. "Black woman mistaken for event staff. Turns out she owns the damn event." Within 5 minutes, it had 12,000 views. Within 10, it had over 200,000. Twitter and TikTok were ablaze with commentary. That's why you check before you assume. Racism doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through policy. She handled that with so much class. I would have flipped a table. Across the ballroom, people were buzzing. Quiet at first, then louder as people realized they'd just witnessed something viral, something real, something that wasn't scripted or exaggerated. It was what corporate discrimination looked like in broad daylight. Subtle, embarrassing, familiar to some, invisible to others, until now. Ben Fraser, who had dismissed April through the mic without even glancing up from his clipboard, now sat backstage trying to figure out how much trouble he was in. A producer handed him a note with 4 words scribbled in all caps. "Do not say anything." He crumpled it in his hand, sweat collecting beneath his collar. On the mezzanine level, a local journalist from the Arizona Business Herald checked his feed and gasped audibly. "Wait, Dawson? That Dawson?" He opened a browser, confirmed what he feared. Dawson Solutions, Inc. had pledged a $200 million innovation grant tied to this year's summit. They weren't just a sponsor, they were the sponsor. His editor's phone was already ringing. Meanwhile, backstage, April calmly took a seat near the tech booth, away from the others. A few other speakers gave her nods of acknowledgement, polite, wary, some sympathetic, but most avoided eye contact altogether. Only one person approached, a tall woman in her 60s, white hair in a silver bob, wearing a navy pantsuit and low heels. "Ms. Dawson," she said gently, extending her hand. "I'm Morgan Hale, president of the Phoenix Summit Foundation." April stood and accepted the handshake. "We were expecting you at the VIP breakfast," Morgan continued. "I'm sorry this is how you were greeted." April met her eyes without blinking. "You weren't expecting me. That's the problem." Morgan opened her mouth, then closed it. She'd been in enough boardrooms to recognize the look April gave her. It wasn't about anger. It was about accountability. April didn't need an apology. She needed acknowledgement. "Would you be willing to speak with our executive committee?" Morgan offered. "Now?" April raised an eyebrow. Immediately, Morgan confirmed. Privately. April paused for just a beat before responding. No. Morgan's face froze. No? If I'm not welcome on your main stage, April said calmly, I have no interest in a closed-door discussion. We can talk right here or in front of everyone. Your choice. Morgan hesitated. This was no longer a PR fix. This was a reckoning. Give me 5 minutes, she whispered, and hurried off with her phone. April checked hers. The video from earlier had just crossed 2.3 million views. A friend had texted, "Girl, you're trending." She was "The CEO is all over LinkedIn." She locked the screen. Not surprised. Not smug. Just steady. She'd been here before. Different rooms. Same disrespect. But this time, the whole world was watching. And she wasn't leaving quietly. Morgan Hale moved with surprising urgency for someone used to polished speeches and slow-moving boardroom decisions. As she disappeared around the corner with her phone pressed to her ear, April remained still, positioned near the main stage but not in it, like gravity had shifted and the center of the entire event was now revolving quietly around her. Across the ballroom, the whispers had grown into conversation. Some people checked their phones, saw the viral clip, and quickly looked around to spot her. Others refreshed their LinkedIn feeds where the hashtag, #SheWasTheCEO, was trending with captions like, "They told her to clean the tables. She funded the tables." Still others stood uncomfortably by the buffet, coffee cups in hand, pretending not to care while clearly observing every move from the sidelines. Karen Whitmore, the event coordinator, had vanished. Whether someone pulled her off the floor or she fled out of shame, no one knew. But her absence was noticed, especially by the AV team, who were now scrambling to reprogram speaker slides. Because April Dawson was no longer just a sponsor. She was the story. Behind the scenes, Morgan was on a secure call with 2 other board members and the summit's legal counsel. Her tone was urgent, her sentences clipped. Yes, it's confirmed. She's here. Yes, she was mistaken for staff. No, we didn't verify her badge before the incident. It's on video. It's everywhere. A pause. We can't just apologize quietly. No, she won't accept that. She wants it public, and frankly, I think she's right. There was silence on the other end, then reluctant agreement. Morgan returned to the stage area with a decision, but by then, it was already too late to contain anything. The ballroom's center screen, originally meant to display sponsor logos, was hijacked by trending social media clips. Someone backstage had connected the feed. Now the whole crowd watched a loop of the moment April was told to clean the table and exit the sponsor lounge. Overlay text read, "Mistaken identity or systemic bias." April noticed but didn't react. She didn't need to. Her story was being told without her lifting a finger. At that moment, Ben Fraser, the MC, stepped forward onto the small prep stage, mic in hand, visibly rattled. His usual charm had cracked. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, clearing his throat. "Before we continue today's schedule, we'd like to correct a serious oversight." April slowly stood. The air in the room thinned. Ben continued, avoiding eye contact with her. "This morning, one of our most esteemed guests, Ms. April Dawson, was improperly addressed and removed from a designated sponsor area. That should have never happened." He paused, and the audience waited. "Ms. Dawson is not only a platinum sponsor," he said, his voice tightening, "but also the founder and CEO of Dawson Solutions, our largest strategic partner for this year's summit." A few gasps. Several heads turned to locate her. Phones rose again. Ben motioned toward the center of the stage. "Miss Dawson, would you be willing to join us for a few words?" It was no longer a question. It was an invitation wrapped in damage control. April walked forward, unhurried, calm. She took the mic from Ben without speaking to him, and he backed away like a man exiting a court he didn't want to lose in. She stood center stage, lights on her face, rows of corporate leaders staring up. "Thank you," she said, her voice measured. "I wasn't planning to speak today. I was simply here to support this summit, invest in its mission, and quietly back its promise of innovation and inclusion." A beat. But when you're black, when you're a woman, when you're not dressed in the expected uniform of power, silence is often mistaken for insignificance. The audience was silent. Not even coffee cups clinked. I was told to clean up a table I paid to sponsor. I was escorted out of a space I helped fund. I was spoken to like someone who didn't belong, despite being the reason this entire summit exists at the scale it does. She let that sit. It needed to. And I don't say this for pity or outrage. I say it because too many people, every day, in every industry, are treated the same way, without the benefit of a camera or a trending hashtag. Most of them will never stand on a stage like this. But their dignity matters just as much. Some eyes welled up. Others looked down, ashamed. April paused, then closed with a question. "So my only ask today is this. Will this be another story we forget by next week? Or will this be the moment we finally begin to check our assumptions at the door?" She handed the mic back to Ben and stepped off the stage to a room filled with silence. Not because they didn't hear her, but because they finally did. The moment April stepped off that stage, the room finally exhaled. A few people began to clap, tentatively at first, then with growing energy. But this wasn't polite applause. This was something different. This was respect meeting recognition. And it wasn't just in that ballroom. The live stream had been running for the last 15 minutes, broadcasting April's speech across every breakout room, hallway monitor, and media platform connected to the Phoenix Leadership Summit's official app. Online, the numbers were exploding. Within seconds of her final words, the hashtag #SheWasTheCEO began trending globally on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Dozens of accounts were reposting her line. Silence is often mistaken for insignificance. One entrepreneur typed, "I needed to hear that today." A senior executive at a finance firm wrote, "I'm rethinking how I've been reading the room for years." But not everyone was celebrating. Backstage, a cluster of people in suits were huddled around laptops and headsets. Morgan Hale, a PR consultant, the summit's legal counsel, and 2 board members. The mood was tense. Morgan's phone buzzed again. "It's CNBC," she muttered. "They're requesting comment." The legal advisor looked up. "Tell them we're reviewing the incident. That's all. No statements yet." Morgan ignored him. "April's not going to let this disappear into a memo. She just turned our keynote into a corporate reckoning." The PR rep nodded, eyes wide. "And the sponsors are watching." Meanwhile, April stood near the back of the ballroom now, sipping water, surrounded by a small but growing circle of people. Founders, creatives, investors, many of whom hadn't dared approach her before. Now they wanted a word, a handshake, a chance to say thank you. One woman stepped forward, a junior executive with her badge flipped awkwardly. "Ms. Dawson, I just wanted to say what you did up there. That was one of the most powerful things I've ever seen." April gave a soft smile. "Thank you. And what you do next with it is what matters." The woman blinked, then nodded, visibly emotional. A few feet away, a young man in his 20s asked shyly, "Is it okay if I share your quote in my newsletter?" April looked at him and said, "Only if you spell my name right." He laughed, and the tension softened just a bit. Then came the shift. Morgan Hale re-entered the room, crossed directly to April, and didn't wait to be invited. "Ms. Dawson," she began, "I want to sincerely apologize on behalf of the entire Phoenix Summit Foundation." The way you were treated was unacceptable. April raised an eyebrow. Yes, it was. Morgan hesitated. I've spoken with the executive committee. We'd like to issue a public statement, and we're offering you a dedicated time slot tomorrow to speak as part of our closing keynote, if you're willing. No, April said plainly. Morgan blinked, stunned. No? I already spoke, April replied, and people listened. I'm not interested in polishing your reputation. I'm interested in reform. A silence hung in the air. Morgan glanced around, aware of how many phones were still out, recording, streaming. April leaned slightly closer and said in a quieter voice, You don't fix this with another panel or photo op. You fix it with structural change. Morgan took a deep breath. Then help us. Tell us what needs to happen. April didn't hesitate. First, you remove everyone responsible for today's incident from leadership roles. Second, you fund mandatory bias training across all affiliated conferences, not just this one. Third, you create a system where attendees can report discrimination anonymously and have it investigated by a third-party team. Morgan's mouth opened, but April cut her off. And finally, you allocate real money, a diversity investment fund, minimum $500,000, to support female founders of color who are often invited into rooms like this, then treated like furniture. Morgan swallowed. I don't know if we can move that fast. April raised a hand. You move fast when there's a fire. This is one. Morgan looked over her shoulder as two of the summit's board members approached. One of them whispered something in her ear, and her eyes widened slightly. She turned back to April. They're authorizing it, she said. All of it? April asked. Every word, Morgan confirmed. Starting today. April nodded, once. Good. Now put it in writing. Within an hour, a new push notification went out to all registered attendees of the Phoenix Leadership Summit. We are proud to announce a new initiative called the Dawson Reform Protocol, created in direct response to today's events. A $500,000 fund has been approved to support women of color in leadership. A third-party reporting system will be launched this quarter. Structural bias training will begin this summer, and responsible parties are being removed from current operations. We thank April Dawson for her leadership, resilience, and vision. On social media, the response was immediate. Screenshots of the push notification flew across the internet. One LinkedIn comment read, "This is what real accountability looks like. Not just words, but change." Another user posted, "April Dawson didn't ask for power. She used it when it counted." And among all the comments, one message stood out. A pinned comment on the original video, posted by a user named Justice for Real. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe in real, lasting change, subscribe to this channel and share this video. Because we don't just tell stories here. We build momentum. The days that followed were unlike anything April Dawson had experienced in her 2 decades of leadership. Within 48 hours, what began as an ugly misunderstanding at a leadership summit had evolved into a national conversation. Major news outlets picked up the story. CNN aired a segment titled, "From Dismissed to Determined, the CEO Who Said No to Silence." MSNBC held a panel discussion on unconscious bias in corporate spaces. The Wall Street Journal published a headline that read, "April Dawson's Stand Forces Structural Reforms at National Business Summit." But it wasn't just media noise. It was action. Other conference organizers, realizing they might be next, scrambled to review their own practices. The Denver Innovation Expo issued a statement affirming their commitment to diverse representation and announced they were adopting what they called the Dawson model. A tech summit in Seattle released an apology for past incidents and pledged to fund scholarships for women of color in data science. April watched all of it unfold quietly. She didn't rush to do interviews or chase airtime. She didn't have to. Her words were already speaking for her, but the work was only beginning. Inside Dawson Solutions, her team was fielding non-stop inquiries, from organizations asking for consultation, from HR departments requesting bias training modules, from advocacy groups looking to collaborate. April's assistant, Mila, brought in a stack of printed letters one morning and placed them gently on her desk. "You need to read these," she said. "They're different." April raised an eyebrow and set aside her tablet. The first letter was from a mid-level employee at a law firm in Chicago, a black woman who had been repeatedly mistaken for administrative staff by visiting executives. "Watching you stand up with outrage but with authority made me believe I could do the same," she wrote. Another came from a Latina entrepreneur who had been denied a booth at a venture conference because her brand didn't look premium enough. She wrote, "You gave people like me permission to demand space, not just request it." April took her time reading each letter. They weren't fan mail. They were evidence. Evidence that what happened in Phoenix wasn't isolated. It was part of a pattern. And now, that pattern was being named. One message in particular stayed with her. It came from a high school student in Newark named Jamila Thompson. 17, a junior. "I want to be a CEO like you one day," she wrote. "But sometimes when I look at the people on stage, I wonder if there's room for someone who looks like me. Watching you reminded me that I don't have to wait to be invited. I just have to be ready." April closed the letter slowly and stared out her window. Beyond the city skyline, the world kept moving. Cars, buses, people checking their watches, rushing to meetings. But something had shifted, even if just slightly. A dent had been made in a system that once seemed unshakable. That afternoon, she called her board together. The agenda wasn't product launches or quarterly revenue. It was purpose. "We've built Dawson Solutions on performance," she told them. "Now we build it on principle." She outlined a new initiative. The Dawson Foundation would expand its scope. It would offer funding, mentorship, and legal resources to underrepresented professionals experiencing workplace discrimination. But more than that, it would document those stories, anonymously if needed, and push for structural reform industry by industry. Her board approved the plan unanimously. Later that evening, April appeared virtually at a panel hosted by Harvard Business School. The topic was Corporate Leadership in the Age of Accountability. One professor asked, "Ms. Dawson, how did you stay so composed in that moment, when you were humiliated publicly?" April paused for just a second, then replied, "Because I wasn't humiliated. I was underestimated. There's a difference. Humiliation requires me to agree with how they saw me. I didn't." The audience fell quiet, and for a moment, even through a screen, the weight of her words was undeniable. Then she added something unexpected. "If anyone here is listening, if you've ever felt overlooked, unseen, or misjudged, I want you to understand something. You don't need to shout to be heard, but you do need to speak. And when you do, make sure what you say doesn't just defend yourself. Let it open a door for someone behind you." That message didn't just land in that lecture hall. It went viral again. Across Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok, that single clip was reposted thousands of times. Comments poured in from people in every sector, from retail workers to tech engineers, from students to CEOs, each with a story, each with a voice. One woman commented, "I didn't think my voice mattered until now." Another wrote, "I'm documenting everything. The world needs receipts." If you're listening to this now, maybe you're one of them. Maybe you've been silent, unsure, or afraid to speak up when something felt wrong. Let April's story remind you that quiet power is still power, and when it meets purpose, it becomes unstoppable. If this story moves you, if it reflects something you've felt but never said out loud, consider subscribing to this channel. Not just to support content like this, but to remind yourself that stories like yours matter too. By the end of the second week, It was no longer just a trending moment. It was a movement. April Dawson's name had become shorthand in business circles for principled power. Her words were now quoted in pitch decks, diversity training slides, and even graduation speeches. What had started as a quiet moment of dismissal at a conference in Phoenix had stretched far beyond boardrooms and social media. It had made its way into classrooms, churches, community halls, and corporate town halls. The Dawson Protocol, initially adopted by 3 major conferences in the U.S., was now being requested internationally. A women's leadership symposium in London reached out for implementation support. A major media group in South Africa requested April's consulting team to help reform their hiring standards. Even the Ministry of Business in Canada asked her to keynote their annual Equity in Industry Summit. April was deliberate with her time. She declined more interviews than she accepted. She preferred working behind the scenes, aligning leaders who were ready to change with resources, frameworks, and most importantly, with truth. One of the most meaningful invitations came not from a conference hall, but from a hospital, Northwestern Memorial in Chicago. Dr. Patricia Voss, head of emergency medicine, sent a personal message. "April, I watched your entire speech. I've led this hospital for 8 years. We've had our own issues, staff misidentifying patients, employees being overlooked because of accent, race, background. Your stance gave me a model to move forward. I'd love to bring you in, not for press, but for purpose." April visited in person. No press release, no camera crew, just a room full of doctors, nurses, and admin staff who had stories they'd never told anyone out loud before. She listened. She didn't interrupt. She took notes. And she left behind a strategy, not just inspiration. Back at Dawson Solutions, the foundation team was rapidly expanding. What began as a single-desk project had now become an entire wing in their Chicago headquarters. A new intake system was built for professionals to report incidents of bias and exclusion in corporate settings. Each case was reviewed, anonymized, then categorized by industry and region. Within 30 days, they had over 900 submissions. Patterns emerged: sectors, roles, repeat offenders. It was data, but more than that, it was voice. April knew that behind every spreadsheet, cell was a face, someone who'd been made to feel small in a place they'd worked hard to enter. And now, they had somewhere to be seen. On the 30th day since the Phoenix incident, April stood before a private gathering of corporate partners and nonprofit allies inside the Dawson Solutions Innovation Lab. She wore a dark green suit, simple earrings, no makeup, and her voice was steady. "We've collected over 900 incident reports in a month. That's not a glitch in the system. That is the system." The room was silent. Executives looked at one another. Some shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. "Bias," she continued, "is not always loud. It doesn't always show up in slurs or threats. Sometimes it shows up in policy, in design, in who gets invited to speak and who's asked to serve coffee. And when we don't track it, it grows. Quietly. Systematically." She walked slowly across the room. "We now have the tools to track it, measure it, and dismantle it." Then she looked each executive in the eye, one by one. "So my question to you is this: will you be part of the old story, or help us write a new one?" Several leaders nodded. A few were already texting their assistants to schedule follow-ups. And in that moment, it was clear. April Dawson wasn't simply fixing problems. She was designing the blueprint for an entirely new kind of leadership culture, one based not on compliance, but conscience. That same week, her team announced a joint partnership with 6 Fortune 500 companies to pilot anonymous equity audit systems across their North American offices. In parallel, the Dawson Foundation launched a mentorship pipeline for high school and college students of color, connecting them with industry veterans committed to equity and long-term career support. And the number of companies adopting Dawson-aligned reform protocols? 42, and counting. But April wasn't chasing scale. She was chasing depth. Her philosophy was simple. Change doesn't last if it doesn't reach the people who've been ignored the longest. One evening, as she reviewed the newest mentorship matches her team had coordinated, she saw a familiar name, Jamila Thompson, the high schooler from Newark who'd written that letter weeks earlier. She'd been paired with a mentor, none other than Dr. Patricia Voss. April smiled softly to herself, leaned back in her chair, and whispered under her breath, "That's the point." She didn't need every platform. She didn't need to trend again. All she needed was that, a connection made, a future protected, a voice no longer alone in the room. 2 years after the Phoenix Summit, April Dawson stood behind a dark wooden podium inside the grand auditorium of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. The room was filled with 600 people, executives, educators, community organizers, students, even federal officials. But April wasn't thinking about the crowd. She was thinking about the moment that had brought her here. She could still hear that voice in her head. "Ma'am, this section is for VIPs only," followed by the murmurs, the subtle laughter, the humiliation wrapped in corporate tone. Back then, she hadn't planned to make a statement. She had only wanted to take her seat, attend the summit, and leave quietly. But life doesn't always let you stay quiet. Sometimes it hands you a microphone you didn't ask for, and asks what you're going to do with it. April adjusted the mic and began. 2 years ago, I was mistaken for event staff at a conference where I was the primary sponsor. That moment, for some, was just another oops in a long list of corporate mishaps. But for me, and for so many others, it was the reflection of something deeper, a system that still questions who belongs in the room. She paused, letting the silence hold. But I wasn't alone. You see, the most powerful thing about that moment wasn't the apology that followed. It wasn't the policy changes or the media coverage. It was the letters, the messages, the thousands of people who reached out to say, "That's happened to me too." She scanned the room, made eye contact with a row of college students seated up front. What happened in Phoenix was a spark. But this, she gestured around her, this is the fire. Because real change isn't when someone says sorry. Real change is when that apology becomes action, and action becomes structure, and structure protects those who've been left out for far too long. The audience listened in stillness. No one checked their phones. No one looked away. Every word was landing like a stone dropped in water. Quiet, but deep. April continued. Since that day, 97 organizations have adopted the Dawson Protocol. Over 60,000 professionals have completed our equity certification. And more importantly, more beautifully, over 18,000 people have submitted their stories. Some anonymously, some boldly, all of them honestly. Her voice caught slightly as she added, "We didn't just build a reporting tool, we built a record no one can erase." She told them about Jamila, the student from Newark, who was now a freshman at Spelman College, studying business, about Dr. Voss, who had transformed Northwestern's emergency department into a national model of inclusive medical leadership, and about the companies that didn't wait for lawsuits, but changed because they knew better was possible. Then she leaned forward, slightly. "But I didn't come here tonight just to celebrate progress. I came to remind all of us of something simple. Every time you choose to say nothing, to ignore the slight, excuse the bias, dismiss the exclusion, you are building the wrong kind of structure. A silent structure. One that holds up systems designed to leave people out." Her tone deepened, steady but personal. "I didn't change the world. I just said no at the right moment. And I backed that no with data, with action, with people who refused to stay invisible." A soft rustle moved through the crowd. One attendee, an older black man in a gray suit, wiped his eyes with a handkerchief. Another, a young white woman in a tech-branded blazer, leaned forward and whispered, "That's exactly what I needed to hear." April took one final breath. "So let me say this plainly. You don't need 1,000,000 followers to make a difference. You need a moment where you choose courage over convenience. And when it comes, because it will, you already know what to do." The room stood up before she even stepped away from the podium. It wasn't just applause. It was understanding. Affirmation. It was the sound of people who knew they'd witnessed more than a speech. They'd seen a mirror, and maybe a map. Later that evening, as April walked through the side exit of the museum toward her car, she was stopped by a woman in her 40s holding the hand of a teenage girl. "Ms. Dawson," the woman said softly, "my daughter's learning to speak up because of you." April smiled and nodded. She didn't need to say much. The girl looked up at her and asked, "Is it true they told you to clean the table?" "They did," April replied, kneeling slightly. "But the important part isn't what they told me. It's what I told them back." The girl grinned. "I'd tell them, too." As the car door closed behind her and the city lights blurred past the window, April Dawson felt something she hadn't felt the day she walked into that summit in Phoenix. Not relief, not pride, something quieter, something stronger, peace. Because the table they once told her to clean, she now helped build. And everyone had a seat.